what's up, everybody? It is me, MJH, and we're live with Andrew Castanuela, the U.S. Senate hopeful Republican representing the great state of Texas. And we're both here with our co-host, Dolly Miller-Brennan. And actually, we're already right in the middle of the conversation, so we just want to go ahead and continue with what we were just talking about. Dolly?
Well, Cass, it's very nice to have you here tonight, and we are really behind you 100% of the way. We know we've got a real American here that is, reaching out not just for the great state of Texas, but to everyone, especially with their military background. And as we were just discussing, the cyber attack on Iran, and what do you think about that in regard to a system of national defense?
I think, when we're talking about national defense, one of the biggest concerns is, of course, computer warfare that we have to implement. We're looking at the Chinese and as well as the Russians, who are now developing technology where they can jam radars and so forth of our armed missiles that are shooting in the sky. So when you're talking about, cyber warfare at any platform, whether it's with a superpower like China or even Russia, or to a rogue state like some of the smaller ones like Syria, Hezbollah, or Iran, cyber warfare is actually where things are headed in this new generation. And I was thinking about it. I was contemplating, as we talked about today's interview about what's going on. And I was thinking, the Chinese are developing really massive technology, but the ability to take out the communications, whether that's through cyber warfare, or whatever venue or platform, is really going to be one of our advantages if we can capitalize on that. So with the Iranians losing their it was a nuclear power plant, is that correct?
Yes. Is it Bashir? They have decided, the one that Russia's helping them with, they're delaying that because they simply can't do it. And they're asking for outside help against this new cyber threat, and Tehran threatens long-term war and reprisal. So they admitted yesterday or Monday that they were under full-scale cyber attack, and it makes you stop and consider this as a new way of national defense. And
even in the service, that was when I was back in the service. That was one of the big things we had to push. Was the big cyber warfare that's going on in. Not just terrorism, but, within the computer systems. We had so much computer security training to kind of prevent any kind of cyber warfare happening within just the smallest of platforms, whether it has to do with healthcare or something like that, to listening to conversations and tracking and analyzing information through computer networks and so forth. So now that if you can master that, which I think we might have a hold on that. I spent a couple of years at Goodfellow Air Force Base, which, we do a lot of training there in reference to that. If you can master that capability to have the edge on the cyber warfare game, with today's technology and the way we fight battles and wars, that is definitely something that you're going to want to your advantage. I think that's something that we really need to start investing a lot of money in, as well as other platforms that, we can talk about later.
Well, yes, again, that's so interesting because it's this Stuxnet malware, and they were offering huge fees to East and West Europe, European countries for helping them, and it backfired, and it became much more aggressive. So, I think, here we are, and we don't know who did it, but we know it may, actually do something to Iran. And I find it interesting that they go to European countries for this help because the European nations are just in chaos right now with so much government spending and so many people depending on the government, actual riots and fights and hurting each other over government benefits.
Well, it's pretty interesting, and I'm always going to be skeptical on any information that kind of get across because it's hard to say, what's real truth in reference to how it implements itself. I think there's a lot of organizations and agencies out there that are, whether in the European side of the house or the Asian side of the house or even here domestically, that are, or in Central America and South America, where, there's they put up a front where there's really, they can kind of seem like things are going okay or bad or whatever it may be, but they also have the technology to be able to help out an organization like Iran. I mean, let's take one of the European organizations that really doesn't want the United States in power or whatever for whatever reason. It gives them an open the door for them to kind of walk and say, oh, hey, look, our nuclear reactor went down. We need some help. Well, what kind of help are you going to get? Maybe advanced technology? Bringing in new technology? I don't know. I'm always skeptical when something like that goes down. It's kind of like the BP, oil spill. What's the real issue that's going on here?
Exactly.
So that concerns me a little bit because I kind of view it more as a thing. All right, maybe they shut down their own reactors because they want somebody to bring in some technology because they couldn't get their, the missile head warheads to kind of fire off in the right sequence or whatever it may be. So if I shut down my nuclear reactor and say, oh, guess what, I had cyber attack, whether it may be a front, but you can bring in some scientists from, some Eastern Bloc country or that was part of Russia or something that can come and provide them the information without having to, it appear like, there's some trade secrets going on or advancement in warfare technology.
This is one of the reasons I support you and want you in office, because you're thinking. And you're thinking out of the box. You're saying, no, wait a minute. Nothing is ever as it seems. Wait a minute. Let's think here. Could this be a possibility? Let's investigate that. So that's one of the reasons I support you and want you in office, because you think out of the box, and that can do nothing but help our national defense and help us here in the United States.
Well, thanks, Dolly, because that's actually what I think everything's so blatant right in front of you. It's easy to swallow and say, okay, yeah, this is what's happened. Nothing really ever happens just like that. There's usually something that goes behind it. It just goes back, I guess, to human behavior. Understanding what's the real motive behind people trying to do what they're wanting to do, or governments what they really want to do, versus what they're showing you what they're doing.
Exactly. Now Russia is offering Chavez help in Venezuela for nuclear help, and he just wants it for peaceful energy. Hello, they're sitting on all the world's oil, but they need nuclear energy? This is almost scary, too.
Well, I'm glad you're saying that, Dolly, because that's a prime example of the ability to go ahead and put nuclear warheads in Venezuela. The way the technology is running nowadays is and we're so bad with it because definitely with the Obama administration and the way they said, okay, we're going to pull some of our missiles out of Europe that's going to intercept. We're going to go with the SALT treaty, and we're going to cut back on our deterrence of nuclear weapons. Well, the Russians and the Chinese aren't doing that. As a matter of fact, we're not even testing our nuclear capability where we can fine-tune our warheads to where they don't do as much damage with the latest technology. But the Russians are going to do it. So all of a sudden you move into Venezuela. Just a couple there. Now we've got a threat on the south of the border of the United States. We really got to think exactly what the motives of these individuals and what they're really trying to do and the cover they're really putting in front of us.
It really ties all together because Iran and Chavez, they hug and kiss all the time. Mm-hmm. Now we have Russia in there. Of course, they hug and kiss with Iran. Now all three of them have this little love triangle going on. So if Iran is having problems, could some of that information perhaps be shipped to Venezuela? And as you say, you've got to also look south of the border. It's not just the immigration policy, but it's, many other factors also. Speaking of immigration policy today, what do they do with that? Mexico was complaining that there's too much crime in Mexico because the U.S., they are extraditing, or no, they're not extraditing, they're transferring Mexican illegals who have committed criminal acts in the United States back to Mexico. Hello! I just found this, I just busted out laughing. I thought, come on, am I reading this right? This is pathetic. They're complaining because we're sending them back, and now their crime in Mexico is escalating because we're sending back illegals that have been engaging in criminal activity.
Exactly. I saw that headliner, and I didn't open up the specific article, but I just saw the headliner. I just kind of just shook my head and said, okay. Like you, it just well, I can't say it doesn't make sense because, that's what we're supposed to do. People break the law, we send them back, especially those that are, very high risk for crime. can't say much to that, to be honest with you, other than we're doing what we need to do in reference to that.
Well, I know that you're very on top of what's going on in China, and in the Asia Times they were commenting that China is really diving deep for its African roots. They're sending Chinese archaeologists off the Kenyan coast to search for Chinese roots. They're offering new help to Kenya and to Africa. And I'm thinking, okay, there's got to be more that meets the eye. I'm sure it's not just some underwater archaeological dig here going on. You know, are they trying to mobilize Kenya?
Well, actually, I think it's probably how do I say this? What I actually think it has more to do with an economic perspective. What I've noticed lately is the Chinese have been trying to buy up all the gold as much as they can in around the world, and there's a couple of organizations. One called for what is called the SOI or SOC, which is basically a Shanghai company that's intended to buy as much gold as possible. And of course, they're in cahoots with the Russians. I guess you never would think they two would be together. But between those two, because they don't have access to the U.S. markets to buy gold, but they're able to go through other companies through Africa and some Indonesian countries, some Asian countries around there. I actually think it's more along the lines of trying to buy up the gold market, the precious metals. Now, you're probably asking, what has that got to do with it? What happens if the American economy collapses?
You know, again, you've tied it. You're thinking outside the box, and you've tied it all back to national defense. China's they're in there with Africa. They're digging. You know, they're having all kinds of things going on, exploring the Chinese roots. Well, if China can, obviously, they're an economic power, and if they can gain control, think of the resources in Africa. My God, the gold, the silver, the diamonds, the stones. If they can gain the resources of Africa, what kind of national defense could you have against someone who could almost mobilize an entire continent, a huge continent, the economic resources?
Yeah, and that's basically goes right back to, I think China's really, they're building up not only the military defense and their technology, but they're also trying to build up an economic power, that's been projected to surpass the United States by sevenfold by the year 2040 at the rate they're going. Of course, they're able to control their dollar as well to not make it marketable. But in reference to going back to the economic perspective is, though, if while we're printing money like crazy in the United States, and they don't, Fort Knox and other agencies in what they call the Western, Western Gold something, they don't have to tell how much gold they have in their reserves, neither does China or Russia. We print money, all of a sudden our economy clashes, our paper's no good because the rest of the world's going to be functioning not on a fiat currency, but it's going to be functioning on precious metals because gold continues to be the commodity that will be traded among nations, even when companies lose their ability to trade with other countries. Like Argentina was one of the examples they presented when in 2001 it shot up. They went to hyperinflation. But now they're on the road to recovery again. But the one thing that was the commodity that they had was the gold market. So I think it's more an underscore trying to prepare themselves to when they hoping that the American economy collapses because we're spending too much money and our dollar's losing all its value. And at that point, when that happens, we'll probably have hyperinflation in the United States. And therefore, I can't afford anything. Our money's no good. Now we're in just commodities and trading products. And the Chinese have all the gold and the Russians have all the oil.
That makes it just makes a tremendous amount of sense, the way you put it. And what do you think about Bill Gates? What's your opinion there?
Bill Gates, the computer?
Yes, I mean, no, I'm sorry, not Bill Gates. I mean,
I think he's rich.
Yeah, I think he's rich, too.
I think you're talking about Robert Gates?
Yes, sir, I am.
Well, it's interesting. I always wonder whether they're listening to these conversations or not, so to speak. But the military in itself, the United States Department of Defense is going through a significant change, and not only in defense cuts, but even philosophy. In other words, Secretary Gates ended up giving a speech to the Naval Academy, and basically what he was saying is that, do we need to continue to have the same amount of Navy ships that we've had in the past? Do we need to still have these forces? And then what ended up happening, and this is actually just recently allocated, it's right there in your neighborhood, actually, Mike, with the closing of the Joint Forces Command. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, that's in my neighborhood. That's right in my backyard where that's going on, GIFCOM.
Yep, they're going to the proposal's been put for to shut it down, although Obama hasn't signed off on it, and a lot of senators, Lieberman being one of them, and another individual, are coming on board saying, hold it, you can't close that command. That's something we created so we can have joint forces. But that's 6,000 people are going to be laid off once they close that command down. But it's just not about just that command. There's a lot of cutbacks that we are doing right now, from not only from our technology, from the fifth generation fighters, to conventional warfare, to our warships, our war carriers, that we have. Between Secretary Gates and President Obama, their goal is to really cut the budget by $300 billion, even though they. We're looking at saying, okay, yeah, we're going to probably get out of Afghanistan at some point. We're going to get out of Iraq, and we anticipate the budget's going to be cut. Well, the concern there is that we'll probably be spending right now less than 4% of the GDP on the budget. That's even less what Carter spent during his time, was at 4.7%. So we have not invested any money in technology. We have not invested any money in building up the force, while the Chinese at the same time, they see that as the above. They still continue to build up the conventional forces. Or we're cutting, Abraham tanks. We're cutting B-52 bombers that we're cutting out. I mean, there's so much that's getting cut out from our national and our Air Force and our ground forces that it's not going to leave us the ability to be able to sustain the two. As a matter of fact, his doctrine is, speaking of Secretary Gates, his doctrine is no longer will the United States be required to fire two wars at one time. He wants a leaner, meaner, swifter, a fighter kind of force that's somewhat like in the European nations right now, which, deterrence has always been our key of keeping stability in a lot of parts of the world. Whenever the world knows that the United States isn't going to be standing there and as the strongest military in the world, they're going to go rogue. They're going to start doing what they've already been doing. So that's some of the things I have about Secretary Gates, and it's supposedly projected, I guess, that he might resign here in either next year or no later than maybe the end of this year. But they're just on a cost-cutting sprint, cost-cutting binge to just cut the military by $300 billion, and at the same time we're increasing Medicare and Medicaid and other programs of federal subsidies that exceed the defense. And like I said, you can have the best government health care in the world, doesn't mean squat if you can't defend your borders.
Well, I found it interesting that Fidel came out and said, stop this push towards socialized medicine toward government health care. It didn't work in Cuba, and it can't work there. I mean, this was, I know he's getting old, and I know he studied to be a priest when he was younger, but I mean, this was, I think, monumental in coming from someone who was the greatest defender of all of this. And he also has his MD, by the way. I think few people know that.
No, I didn't know
that. Yeah, Fidel has his MD because at that time, that was my area in college years ago, and that time, the easiest way for you to get an education, just like Allende in Chile also was an MD, the easiest way to get your education, if you had the smarts, you went and you got your MD because that was paid for by the government. After you got your MD, then you went into politics or whatever else you wanted to do. So I know Fidel had an MD, and I know Salvador Allende had an MD also. And when Fidel is saying this doesn't work, I know it's a state the size of New York, but his point being, if it can't work here, how can you possibly propose it's going to work in the United States and take you down that path? So from what you're saying, I see that we are in a serious position in regard to a lack of a strong national defense, and that every country needs one. And if we don't have one, this world without borders just doesn't work, because you're going to have to defend yourself.
Exactly. I mean, for instance, and let me give you an example. couple things that are on the horizon with both. And we're focused a lot on two things, I think, in this country. Well, three things. One is definitely jobs, which most people, when it comes down to it, even in a world of chaos, it's really come down to feeding yourself. So jobs, number one. The second thing that's really a hot issue right now is illegal immigration. And then the third one would be the war that's going on, or the economy, but that goes with the jobs, but the war that's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq. And they've kind of taken their eye off of what the big superpowers are doing between China and Russia. For instance, the SAM missiles that the Chinese and the Russians have incorporated are more advanced now, to the point that they go up to about 500 miles to be able to detect and shoot down any of our planes. Between the SA-20, which is one that's created by the Russians, they're also selling that to other nations like Algeria and Iran. The Russians also have the HQ-90, which is a mobile interceptor. And unlike in the old days where you had a missile defense system where you could shoot down planes that are coming through and it was stationary, they pretty much mobilized that whole process to where now you really, it's going to be difficult to find them and knock them out so that you can have air superiority. The other things are they're advancing their fighter aircraft. You know, between the PL-12 or the J-15 and the F-10 with the Chinese and the MiG-29 and the Su-30. You know, these are fifth-generation fighters that right now will dominate anything we have in the air. And if you know, one thing is you have to have air superiority, otherwise your ground forces are susceptible to attack. And we're giving that advantage away to our counterparts. Now, going back to the United States, one thing is, as long as we continue to be a superpower military-wise, nations will continue to kind of understand, okay, we have a checks and balance system in the world. When you have the Chinese and you have the Russians, who are now become the superpowers in the world, and we've become a third-rate national defense and really couldn't find our way out of a bar, we have problems. Our arming missiles that they're able to use, that now shoot down air-to-air combat, are exceeding our technology. And the reason being because after the Clinton administrations, we cut back a lot of our budget. Matter of fact, we laid off 700,000 employees, cut our defense budget by a third, which kind of made sense because the Cold War was kind of over. But instead of reinvesting in new technology, of course, we put it in another program. Then you had 9/11 come around, and basically what Bush was doing was he was trying to build up our military to what it somewhat should have been to fight the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, because there's no way we would have been able to do it. We already stretched too far thin under the Clinton administrations with Bosnia and Herzegovina and other places that were doing peacekeeper missions in the no-fly zone in Iraq. So here we are again at this point that we're withdrawn out of Iraq, and what they want to do is, once again, cut that budget out and not invest in new technology, the F-22 Raptor, F-35, you know, or advanced carriers. And we have 13 carriers right now, and we're cutting them down to 11 to 10 carriers. And we'll replace them with other carriers that are smaller, but not able to have the same capabilities as our USS Nimitz. So we're losing that naval advantage as well. But people aren't realizing this because, you know, we're focused too much on a lot of the domestic issues. Well, it's not going to matter. The domestic issues aren't going to matter if we cannot defend our sovereignty, our grounds, our way of life.
Exactly. No. And now they're saying Al Jazeera says that the Pakistani government is going to fall. When Al Jazeera says that, I'm thinking, wait a minute, why are we not hearing a lot about this?
Yeah, actually, I read something about that, to be honest with you, and I was reading, I think it was Woodward's kind of commentary on the Afghan thing, and one of the recommendations was that Pakistan, because of its issues, its economic status right now, and of course all the floods and everything that's going on too, have not given it the opportunity to be a major role player in Afghanistan with the Taliban. I mean, there are some. When I was reading an article, it's pretty much saying a lot about jihadi terrorists and in the terrorism concept, or guerrilla warfare, as I should say, is that they can afford to lose whatever it is. To them, there's no amount of casualty that's going to say, okay, we win the war. Or their whole objective is for us to withdraw from Afghanistan and other places. With that said, they're very mobile, and we as a military force cannot really kind of locate them because they break up in small factions and attack in small areas, and it's hard for us to kind of, us as a military superpower, to come there and say, we steamroll, boom, we take them out. Well, we can't do that when, there's I don't want to use that technology of an insect, but either way, they're kind of moving all over the place, and it's hard to do that. Pakistan is prime right now to be a major player in negotiating things with Afghanistan, but unfortunately, they don't have right now the economic power to be able to do that, and the Taliban is going to eventually kind of start taking over and influencing a lot of the Pakistani government.
I find that extremely interesting, and I find the connection, I keep going back to the connection to Venezuela and the connection to Iran and the connection Iran has in Afghanistan and bringing people over here possibly to come through our borders. And Al Jazeera, I mean, if you got to keep your friends close and your enemies closer, so you got to know what they're saying too. And they had big headlines today that said, want to commit murder? Going to Mexico could help. They have more murders there. It said that 95% of the about 22,000 executions from December of 2006 to April of 2010 have not been investigated, and that they're only reporting about 2% of the 25% increase of at least 5,500 murders, thousands of stabbings, rapes, etc. Now, this doesn't sound to me like Mexico. This sounds to me, I mean, not that it is, but it sounds to me like we're having a lot of others coming across and using Mexico and coming up to the border. What would your opinion be on that?
Well, strategically, it's a platform. This is one of the reasons why, I would kind of look at it from this perspective between Iraq and Afghanistan. If we pull out of Afghanistan, I strongly support, and I know people probably going to disagree with me, but I'd rather have this. I don't mind having a military permanent base in Afghanistan, not to rule the country. I'm not looking at occupation. I'm looking at the military force and presence there. How come? Who do I got to the north of me? Who do I got to the, if other Pakistanis, to the west of me? We have pre-positioned military bases to respond to Iran. We can go up to Russia or other those rogue countries. We can go to the right and deal with some of the stuff. And the same thing we have in Iraq. Just military permanent bases like we do have in North Korea, like we have in Okinawa, Japan, and and other places throughout the world. They kind of show that military presence, that here we are to stabilize the region. And believe it or not, I believe that a lot of the Middle Eastern countries would like that, because then they know there's going to be a balance there. No one rogue country like Iran is going to go off and do whatever they want to do. Because why? The United States is there to implement its policy, its foreign policy, which we have a natural interest in that area because of the oil. If it's not even for us, it's even for our allies.
So what you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is we need a strong military presence in many countries, not to rule the country, not to influence the elections, not to enforce our will, but to be there as a stabilizing base for these countries that can't effect that on their own right. And in doing so, it not just stabilizes U.S. national defense, it really stabilizes each individual nation's defense. And rather than make one giant world government, which could not work, because there are just too many factors involved, it allows each nation to stabilize themselves. As the United States is a superpower, we have a responsibility to do that. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, everything except not in many nations. I would go with, or many countries. I would go more strategically, because there's no way we're going to be able to be in every
right.
in a lot of nations. But strategically, when we look at our national interest and the national interest of our allies, which kind of goes back to what you're asking about Mexico, it's a platform. If they can go in there and destabilize Mexico and make it more of a communist socialist state, to where they can infiltrate and bring their own agenda like they're trying to do or what's happening in Venezuela. You know, that was one of the things that, you know, with President Reagan was he said, oh yeah, you want to come in our back door? Let me show you what's going to happen when you come down in our back door. And we responded as we needed to. Unfortunately, with the situation in Mexico and all the other sensitive immigration issues and the drug wars that are going on and so forth, it's just they're primed for, you know, pretty much somebody coming in and they're and trying to destabilize that government. And you're right there on the back door of the United States.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I never cared for his exuberance. I mean, and I studied him for a while, and he spoke of kind of, but I think he was right here, even though I didn't like him. But what you're saying, he called it the arc of instability, and he brought that arc of instability from Iran. Mm-hmm. You know, when, you know, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, that was included, and went down to India, Afghanistan, and that he called that the arc of instability, and he said that's where strategic defense needs to rest. Mm-hmm. And whether I liked him or not, it seems to me, from what you're saying, and you have a strong military background, that might be valid.
I mean, the communism, and I use that loosely, but you know, I know it was a big topic back in the day of fighting communism and social media. It has never really gone away. You know, it just kind of went in hibernation, and then unfortunately, like what ends up happening in most situations is if a company's not able to adapt and survive and be prosperous, it's going to do whatever it can to do. And if communism is what works for that country, then that's what it's going to do. Or a hybrid form of it, like they might be doing in China, of communism, where they're trying to integrate a little bit of capitalism, but yet they're able to control the market. It's kind of like, okay, we get to take your money, and yet I still have control of everything I get to say.
Well, it's like we're moving almost like toward a fascist state. It seems like the first thing we're doing, like they did in the 30s pre-World War II, Germany and mm-hmm. Europe, nationalized the bank, take control mm-hmm. of them, nationalize automobile manufacturers, nationalize the health care, mm-hmm. and then you have a dependent economy, you know, where the economy is totally, completely dependent upon the government, so therefore they're going to do anything the government wants because that's where they're getting everything they need, which we're showing in Europe. Now they can't have it, and so they're rioting. In Belgium, I mean, I've been in Belgium. Belgium's never riot, you know, I mean, mm-hmm. they just don't do it. And now they're rioting there. It's like you said, it's more of an insipid form of communist socialism, whatever you want to say, but it certainly is there. And look now, the labor unions. What is it? Their first one, unite, workers of the world unite. So now we're having, again, this labor union unite. What they don't realize, I think, personally, that if this is allowed to happen, believe me, as workers, your rights are going to be taken away later, but we don't see that now in the meantime. But
no, you're absolutely right. Right now, they've been leveraging a power within our economic structure, our economy for a period of time. But you know, the reality is, I think socialism and those fascist people who believe in one kind of form of national government, one kind of national bank, are infiltrating those organizations to push their own agenda, which basically goes back to the fact, all right, so everybody's dependent in the United States upon, you know, a lot of federal services. What happens if we go into chaos? In other words, let's just say and I was reading this as an example, one of the other places I was reading, the oil shoots up to $150 a barrel. What do you think would end up happening? People start selling their treasury bills, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody says a treasury bill because I want to get on the oil market. I want to make my money, and I've been waiting for my time to get some money. Okay, so they go ahead and they sell the treasury bills. Well, there's a mechanism in place that when the treasury bills get sold off, guess who buys them? Uncle Sam. To try to stabilize the economy, so it starts printing money that it really doesn't have to try to buy those treasury bills. So as everything starts going off on a tangent, and you have this process where our debt now is getting called in with the treasury bills, and people are selling it off. We no longer have value in the government. People aren't trusting the government because, you know, it's losing its treasury bills, which is what sign of people have faith in the government. And they're buying into other commodities like oil and other things then all of a sudden the food shortage is going to start going up because people aren't trusting the government into that. So now you have a state of chaos. Well,
we're fastly approaching that.
Yeah, but guess what happens in a state of chaos? You have a charismatic leader who's going to step forward and say, I can save everything, and this is what we need to do. And that's what Adolf Hitler did. That's what Napoleon Bonaparte did. That's what these people do. They come to the rescue. Oh, we got to stabilize chaos. But in order to do that, you're going to have to give up your right to bear arms. You're going to have to give up your right to this. We're going to have to rationalize, how much food you get, your gasoline.
Well, not to that extent yet, but that's what Obama's trying to do. He's like, I want to save y'all. Just rely on me, and some people are buying it, but they ain't looking ahead. And Cass, you brought something up. This has to do with economics, but just like with that bailout and all that stuff, just hypothetically, if we hadn't done that, and Wall Street, it would have been rough for a while, but all these companies that went bankrupt, they would have, AIG and all that, and the commodities would still be in demand, and consumers would have just gone elsewhere to look for these commodities and services. But just hypothetically, if that would have happened, if we had not bailed out Wall Street and AIG, what would happen to all that money that wasn't going into Wall Street anymore? Because the money would still exist. But, I actually know the answer to this, I think. But I want to see what you have to say about it. Where would that money be?
Well, first of all, we would have been put on our knees, I believe, as a nation, because we would have gone through a recession. But you know what? We've been through a recession once before. But at the same time, we would have, the money, like you said, it would still been there. Eventually, the market would have been able to recover itself because people would end up starting to buying and investing in other securities that are more appropriate. But once the government stepped in and started buying up the securities, then the money, the dollar, was no longer of a significant value because basically I'm buying up my own stuff in reference to the government buying the securities with taxpayer money. So that's like saying to everybody, well, our dollar's not that strong anymore because it's not really worth that much because we're buying all these toxic waste. So I think people would have probably eventually invested in other commodities. There would have been a major recession, but it's just some things just kind of like that happen. But I would not have bailed them out because now I strongly feel like the government owns a lot of our assets, and now they control.
You see, I disagree with that bailout from the beginning. And with Wall Street, it's not all of Wall Street that would have come down. It's not, we'd have been bankrupt as a nation. Our whole economy wouldn't be there anymore. But what would happen was some companies would have had to break off, or basically just like back in, I guess, 85, I think it was, when AT&T broke up, and it actually kind of benefited the economy in the long run, even though it's going to be rough for a minute. I think that that minute turned into a few years now with Obama, and it wasn't just Obama, by the way. King voted on that bailout bill. I just think that some things are meant to be, and it should have been left alone. And now, 2 years later, we're still dealing with what could have been fixed in a few months, maybe a year.
Well, I think if you let it take its course, and of course it goes back to what I was talking earlier about, the cyber warfare in Iran. When the banks got bailed out, and I think it was a lot of European partners as a majority of the assets, and who was ready to step in, and I think it was a lot of European partners as well that had a major stock or major investment in some of those banks that needed to be bailed out or wanted to be bailed out. And that's where the government came in, the American government came in and stepped in and said, okay, we're going to help you out because we understand that our banking system is going to help out your banks up in Europe and so forth as well. I just kind of buy a more of a conspiracy kind of perspective, as that it was kind of intended to do that so to give the certain financial institutions to be able to buy up a lot of American assets and control the economy.
And, Mike, I like what you said, too, about what you're really saying is the economy would have righted itself. You know, if we'd left it alone, it would have righted itself. And like Cass says, it would have hurt in them before, and we allowed the economy to right itself. Now you said European countries, like you said, some of them are coming in and buying this stuff, and then the government takes control of that, so then the government owns the assets, and the market doesn't have a chance to stabilize. Is that what you both are saying?
Oh, does the market have ability to stabilize? Not until the government controls its deficits in its budget, I think. I think it's very fragile, and I'm by no means a financial analyst, so to speak. But I think it's a lot depends on what the government is going to be able to do to sustain itself on conservative spending, fiscal spending, I should say.
Well, I think that's what we were saying. If Wall Street's allowed to stabilize itself, if the market's allowed to correct itself, it can only benefit the government. You'll hurt in the short term, but not in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And now, until we, like I said, until we're able to control our budgets and our deficits, and our debt, people are going to lose faith, because that's basically what the market's all about. Do you have faith in a certain commodity or government? And if you go ahead.
You've heard about, everyone's heard about the European terror plot foiled. Linked to Al-Qaeda, attacked Britain, France, and Germany all at the same time. Pakistani-based fighters were plotting simultaneous operations in London, major French and German cities. The attacks were not imminent, but it says that, here's where I'm tying this into, India's financial capital, Mumbai. Mm-hmm. They were involved in this. Mm-hmm. And it was intelligence sharing, I guess, between the UK, France, Germany, and the U.S. that led them to foil it, but it was imminent, it was going to happen. So if what you're saying is, if the government owns all of the assets, and then you have a terror plot, that if it's going to take over, it's going to have to be linked up to the financial capital. Mm-hmm. So you find if the government has the assets, you have a major simultaneous terror plot coming in, and if it's allowed to succeed, and then you have the financial capital involved, then you're seeing all defenses out the window.
Mm-hmm. So then you have chaos.
Absolutely, we have chaos. That's what we're seeing in Greece and some of these other countries now.
We're no different when it comes down to from a primitive perspective. We could be the most civilized nation in the world with the most advanced technology. It doesn't mean anything when it comes down to survival. And that's what chaos really comes down to. And you're looking for something or somebody to provide that sense of safety and security. I mean, that's the reason our economy is kind of suffering right now, is because, people aren't, we don't have people who have jobs, who don't feel safe. I mean, I think I was reading something earlier about, a good large percentage, and I don't want to misquote the percentage, but a large percentage of people who don't trust the American government to be able to kind of resolve the economic issues of getting people jobs. If they ain't got jobs, people get scared and they get worried, and that's really when we start getting down to the primitive stages of human behavior.
I think you're absolutely right. You said it again. It all goes back to taking care of yourself. Not allowing chaos to ensue, and allowing the market to correct itself. And I noticed in Norway, they arrested an Al-Qaeda plot man, and in the United States and Afghanistan, they assassinated some. They killed some Al-Qaeda plot men. So I'm thinking, wait a minute here. If you arrest them and take control of that situation, maybe that's more effective. Maybe you can get some information.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, with going back to guerrilla warfare, is that they're gonna function in small cells. That's why we'll never be able to win. I kind of say this to a great degree. You cannot win that guerrilla warfare when they've dispersed out of Al-Qaeda dispersed out of Afghanistan, and now its market is repositioned itself in other parts of the world.
In Norway, for heaven's sake.
They're all over. Now their cells are just pretty much and it's intended to create that kind of insecurity, so to speak. So then you can kind of then have somebody kind of step in and make things happen and take control of the government. That's why, one of the things is, although, like I said, we'll pull out of Afghanistan, but I want a strong military presence there. a permanent military base, but that also there's a positive thing to, I think, strategically, if this is just myself, and that is that what happens if you walk away and they're hiding all the in the tunnels and the other places, and they no longer see us there? What are they going to do? They're going to come out.
Exactly. They're going to come out.
And then they're going to start regrouping, and they're going to start, getting together. Say, all right, now here's what we need to do. Well, that's what we've been wanting them all the time. We want you to get together. So then now we know where you're at, and now we can take you out.
Well, I'm telling you, if you don't have that can of Raid, sitting the bait, I mean, in Houston, my goodness, you have to have outdoor exterminators. I don't know if anybody's ever seen a tree roach, but, it's something to behold, and Yankees come down and see a tree roach. Look out, what is that? What is that? They think it's an animal. So if you don't have that can of Raid there, that baby's going to come in your house.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then you can kill that one. But guess what? It's going to multiply even some more, and then eventually, unless you nuke the house completely,
that's right.
You ain't going to get rid of it because you just can't kill one. You got to wait. You got to find the nest, and right now the nest is just spread out. So you got to let them build their nest. Get back together, get your network set up again. Let's play dumb and stupid and pretend like we forgot about you, but we really didn't. That's actually going back to Secretary Gates' perspective, back when he took over the CIA. Is one of the things that we ended up doing is we got rid of a lot of our functions in CIA functions in intelligence, and started shifting them from to spy with the Russians and the Chinese and other agencies, strategic understanding of information, and just started shifting to chemical warfare, terrorism, economic instability, and stuff like that. So we laid off a bunch of our CIA agents, closed a bunch of our outposts, and which kind of leads us to the fact that we don't have the intelligence that we need to be able to make the decisions the president needs to make in order to kind of say, okay, well, I need to send my SEAL team in right now. Or I need to send this strike force. Or I need to do this. Or I know a covert operation. That was one of the strongest assets we had as the United States, of having a Central Intelligence Agency that was able to gather as much intelligence as we could. I don't think we have that capability anymore.
Well, I had an ex-boss that called one time the CIA is the covert arm of the U.S. presidency to overthrow popularly elected governments that will, at times, and its function should be intelligence gathering. And that seems to be almost what Gates is trying to do here, is, cut back on the intelligence gathering.
Oh, he did. He cut back. Let me see what I had something written here. Oh, gosh almighty. I think we ended up closing Central Intelligence, I don't know, with NATO and so forth. I don't have it with me right now, but we ended up cutting a third of our CIA forces during when he was director of the Central Intelligence Agency. We ended up changing our shift of focus on how we wanted to gather intelligence, and no longer were we tracking the Russians and the Chinese as much as we used to. So then, therefore, one would end up saying that we end up losing a lot of 9/11 because of that. Here's those 20 CIA stations overseas were closed, and some of the larger ones in major capital shrinks by 60% were shut down under his leadership as the CIA. And this is back in 1991. That we didn't even have the alarming inability to gather and analyze even basic intelligence, including Aldrich Ames, who was a CIA spy within the CIA for the Russians. So, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not having that agency up and running and giving us the data that we need to make smart decisions.
And so that it needs to be an actual intelligence gathering agency and not just an arm of the president to more or less bolster his policies and write a white paper, as my ex-boss called the big lie, write a white paper and say, okay, this is what you want to hear, so I've written it, but we're really not gathering any intelligence.
Well, you asked me what my position is on it. It is an intelligence agency gathering. But I also think at the same time many people fear the United States because of the CIA. They felt the CIA could just pretty much come at any time, anywhere. Now, I do support probably some covert operations that, the public doesn't really need to know.
Yes, I support covert operations now, too. I've come 180 degrees back to my roots. And I think some covert operations are absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and they've been going on for years, but, and that's what's kind of stabilized markets. But at the same time, the CIA and other agencies, got a bad side as well, because like you said, it becomes the arm of the president, and the next thing you know, it's no longer about intelligence gathering. It's about, manipulation and power and drug arm sales and drug trafficking, and, the whole shebang kind of goes into play.
And when they cut our military budget, a friend of mine who is a very excellent photographer, journalistic photographer, and he was in the paratroopers and injured, in that respect. I think it was in Afghanistan. And he said that under Bill Clinton, and I always kind of like Billy Clinton. I mean, I'm not a Democrat, but come on, how can you not like him? Good old Southern boy. Anyway, he said their supplies were cut so drastically that they just didn't have what they needed to conduct the war that they were supposed to conduct. So you're fighting a politically correct war, which really doesn't bolster national defense. There's no intelligence gathering. So, again, you're ensuing into chaos.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened, because I was in the military during the Clinton administration, and that was exactly what happened is we ended up losing. The demands did not go up. Matter of fact, they increased after we cut our forces by 700,000 people, and a third of our resources, or conventional resources, got cut as well. We had to do more with less, and that causes a great amount of strain on the military individual. And their ability to kind of continue to mentally and emotionally stay focused on what we need to be doing. I mean, you get burned out.
And another friend of mine has sons in strategic places, and they didn't have night goggles. They were supposed to have them. He sent the money for them to purchase or purchase them for their own night goggles, because the government, our military, could not. They couldn't support their own troops. They didn't have the funds necessary to support their own troops, so they're writing home and saying, we need this. It reminds me of the days when guerrilla warfare, that's why England lost. We had all these little militia cells in this country, all these little Minutemen all around the country. And they were ill-equipped, but they had, their own little cells, and England was fighting conventional war, and it scares me that we might try to fight a conventional war, and we need to relate to these different terrorist cells as we did in the beginning of this country, where we had those small groups fighting, and the British never knew where anyone was going to be.
Mm. And that's one thing I think Gates is pushing, is he's wanting a more of elite kind of special force, and I think that's something on one of my platforms. I do want a special elite force of combination of the other agencies, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, to where it's a joint task force that's very elite, and it goes in and out and takes care of certain specific operations, but that does not mean we cut our funding and our military power that keeps the world safe, to be honest with you. Lets people trust and say, okay, well, your dollar may not be strong, but we know your muscle still is, and I think that's what the world needs to know.
And I like your concept that the U.S. is just there as a stabilizer, and every nation should have its own national identity. Mm-hmm. It's a safer, more peaceful world when you do, not when it's just one big one. Everybody's vying for power, and how are you going to take care of everybody? Mm-hmm. And I noticed that Congress went against the policy the Obama administration says it's going to hurt U.S. companies and workers, but they're slapping retaliatory tariffs on Chinese goods and trying to devalue the Chinese currency because, as you said, they're buying up the gold, and they were talking about it, in the media, even the mainstream media. They're trying to buy up the gold.
Well, not only the gold, they're manipulating their I think it's not yen. I forgot what their zen is. I think the dollar is. Anyway, yeah, they're manipulating that process to where it doesn't go up, and then people start buying their currency because they don't want other countries to buy their currency.
I guess they're trying to buy gold and silver and platinum.
And they, at the same time, keeping their dollar strong by keeping it low. So,
So in summary, we need to keep our economy strong. We need to protect our capitalistic way of doing things. And without that, there's no way we can strengthen our national defense.
Exactly.
Well, you hit it on the head, Mike.
Yeah. That's
we only got 60 seconds left. I had to say something.
Okay, well.
What you say always has weight behind it. Better to say a couple of words with weight behind it, you know. So what you say carries weight.
It's like that old saying, when E.F. Hutton talks, everybody listens.
When the hammer comes down, everybody listens.
There you go. Well, no, I just want to say appreciate once again coming on board. I really want to get this campaign off the ground. I'm looking for support from a lot of folks, so this is the way it's going to have to happen.
And you need campaign contributions also.
Yes.
You know, because it does take funds to do this. And what's that again? Your website?
I was just plugging this website again, CasForSenate.com. Very important, guys. Write that down. CasForSenate.com. CasForSenate.com.
And I know a lot of people are listening.
Find out all about what CAS stands for and all about what he's going to do when he gets into the Senate. And you can make your contributions there. And am I leaving anything out there, Cass?
No, you nailed it, Mike. You nailed it.
And there are a lot of people listening because I've had a lot of emails and a lot of calls and a lot of Facebook connections that they're listening. I don't know why they're afraid to speak and call in, but they are listening.
That's good.
You know. Cool. And we know you're going to make it. We're behind you 100%. And can we look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday evening?
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care, darling.
Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, y'all take care. Bye-bye.